Hey people, voice talking to you, and today we're talking about a new game called Diviner. This is a Souls-inspired dark fantasy dungeon crawler strategy roguelike with a seriously interesting combat system. If you think you've got what it takes to survive the harsh challenges of the sun-scorched ruins, I'll have a link for you down in the description where you can download this demo for free and try it out for yourself. Down there you'll also find a link to my Twitch channel, just in case you'd like to join us when we play through these games live. Now, Diviner's own description on Steam refers to its story as vague, so details are not especially forthcoming. In a very Souls-like fashion, you'll have to really dig in if you want to understand what the hell is actually going on here. Here's what I know. We are a kind of undead known as a tethered. Effectively, our soul is bound to our weapon, also called our tether, and this both keeps us alive and keeps us trapped inside the ruins of what must have once been a grand city. Our goal is to escape, but there are countless other tethered stalking the ruins seeking other tethers to keep themselves alive. If we have any hope of making it out, we'll need to keep our tethers intact, improve our weapons and skills, and survive the horrific swaths of sun-scorched foes seeking our demise. Now, that doesn't explain a whole lot, but uncovering the tale behind the sun-scorched ruins through environmental storytelling is part of the fun. The world itself has a pretty incredible sense of scale, with towering structures off in the distance amid a dust-choked wasteland. Judging from the visuals and the general aesthetics of the world, I'm assuming Diviner is a post-apocalyptic story. And since the game often uses the term sun-scorched, I'm assuming that the apocalypse had something to do with the sun. I'll leave the details beyond that for you to uncover for yourself, but the world as a whole is marvelous to look at. Some of the textures take a while to load in, and could still use a bit of polish overall, but if you like the style of Souls games, then you are absolutely going to love the look of this one. Weapon and armor models are remarkably detailed, including notches, patches of rust, and an awesome rustpunk design. Is rustpunk even a real word? Whatever, it is now. Some enemies are nothing more than knights in funny armor, but most are nasty, charred undead or twisted amalgamations of other tethered that remind us of the horrible fate waiting for us if we fail to escape the ruins. Now, I know I said Diviner was very Dark Souls inspired, but to be clear, I was specifically referring to the style, not the gameplay. When it comes to exploration, this is an old-fashioned dungeon crawler through and through. That said, there are two glaring differences between this game and something like Grimrock or Ultima. First off, we play as a single character rather than a party of adventurers, so we can't rely on the strengths of our fellows to see us through. Secondly, when not in combat, we can move around largely without restriction, so turns and grid spaces only matter when we cross swords with an enemy. On the one hand, the switching back and forth between spaces and free movement gives the player a bit more freedom to explore and look around. There's nothing wrong with the way it is now, but personally I would find it much easier to plan out my combat strategies if I could always see the grid and knew how many spaces were between me and my enemy. I don't think keeping the grid active during exploration would take away from the experience anyway, since unlike Grimrock, free look is always active, even in combat. Before I talk about combat though, let's get into the RPG systems. As I mentioned, your weapon, or tether, is your lifeline in this cruel world. As such, all of our skills and most of our stats are directly tied to our weapons, and there's a pretty sweet variety of different weapons to find and experiment with, including great swords, maces, and even flintlock pistols. We do also have a single armor slot and 3 ring slots to play around with as well, but these items can't be upgraded. Armor helps determine some of our base stats and gives us a single unique buff, while rings offer bonuses when we switch weapons, but more on that mechanic later. The real core of our build comes from our weapons. Whatever weapon we're wielding serves as our tether, so we quite literally cannot exist without it. Each weapon has its own strengths and a unique benefit, and typically comes with 1 or 2 starting skills engraved on it. Engraving is the process we will use to modify, upgrade, and repair our tethers. In Diviner, skills are items that can be removed and swapped between weapons whenever we wish, so long as we aren't in combat. Mixing and matching skills to suit the weapon's strengths and our overall build is the core of our combat preparation. Some weapons may increase the amount of guard received from skills, while others may increase the damage of certain attacks. Though we can swap between weapons during combat, keep in mind that skills engraved onto one weapon cannot be used when wielding another. Also, there is no such thing as a basic attack in this game, so your skills are all you have to rely on. Now, this might sound really odd, but the concept is actually quite similar to Pokemon, if you think about it. Each weapon is essentially a different Pokemon on your team with its own moves. This connection makes even more sense when you consider the way we can swap between weapons during combat, and creating synergy between our weapons and their engraved skills is the key to victory. Which weapon you have in hand can drastically change the flow of combat though, and will affect your core stats as well. Your guard, stamina, and damage values will all shift depending on what weapon you're wielding. so some can make you tankier while others offer more damage. In addition, we can upgrade our weapons with tether fragments we take from defeated enemies or find in loot during exploration. Different kinds of fragments will offer different improvements, from damage to guard to even improving that weapon's unique effect. Each weapon is upgraded individually though, so carefully consider the benefits of each fragment before choosing where to apply it. In the demo, we always start with the same set of basic equipment, but I could definitely see the devs adding in different starting loadouts to make the early game a bit more interesting. I don't think this would be strictly necessary considering how much your build will change as you advance, but it would definitely increase the replay value of the game quite a bit. Now, combat might seem simple enough at first, but it's actually a deceptively complex system. Diviner uses a turn-based and grid-based approach, similar to many classic dungeon crawlers. Our 4 primary stats are health, guard, stamina, and tether durability. When our health reaches 0, we die, obviously, and health is extremely hard to recover, so guard serves as our first line of defense. Our guard is determined by our armor and weapon, and can be restored with certain skills. When an attack reduces our guard, or that of an enemy, to 0, excess damage doesn't carry over to health. However, each time an entity's guard is broken, their maximum guard decreases, making it easier to break through each time. Our stamina determines how much we can do each turn, and different skills will require different amounts of stamina. We aren't fixed in place though, and can switch in and out of focus mode to move around during combat, with each square moved costing 1 stamina point. And moving around in combat is actually an extremely important tactic, as practically every skill has a preferred strike zone, and will inflict an additional effect when attacking an enemy from either the front, side, or rear. Some of these effects will simply increase damage, while others will decrease poise or apply afflictions such as Blight, Oil, or Shatter. There's a surprising number of different afflictions and buffs that can play into all different kinds of builds, and it can be a lot to keep track of at the start. There are tooltips for each affliction that'll tell you what they do, but a bit of UI gore causes the Steel Buttons tooltip to cover the status effect description when mousing over it, which is a huge pain. Since I mentioned it, there are 2 actions we can take beyond moving and using skills in combat. The first is switching weapons, which isn't just to change our available skills, but actually applies a special buff for that turn based on one of our rings. Each ring gives us a different buff to work with and has a separate cooldown. The second action is to try and steal a tether fragment from our enemy. Stealing spends stamina to increase the amount of a certain type of fragment we get from defeating that enemy. Now this might seem like something you'd only do when you're certain of victory and want a bit of extra stuff, but when you realize how vital our last statistic is, you'll come to see how important it is that we keep a constant flow of fragments. I'm talking about the durability of our tethers. As I mentioned, the lore of the game tells us that our existence is directly tied to our weapon. And though we don't flat out die when our weapon breaks like I thought we would, honestly, we might as well have.
-6? What? Oh, our weapon's broken. It's so over.
When fighting with a broken weapon, skills take twice as much stamina and deal half as much damage, making combat nearly impossible. So maintaining your weapons either by sacrificing upgrade fragments or spending rare glue vials is vital for your survival. Now visually, combat isn't all that impressive. There are unique animations for most skills, but they're very choppy, pardon the pun, and even when enemies are walking around, it feels more like watching an NPC lagging out. If this is meant to mirror the way old-fashioned dungeon crawlers looked, I think they need to clean it up and lean into that a bit more. Otherwise, it just needs to be fully animated. There are several issues with animations pushing models or the camera through walls, and some enemy models are too large for the single space they take up, and start floating to compensate.
Where is the... He's floating higher and higher into the air.
It might look a bit goofy sometimes, but Diviner is a brutally difficult game, and chances are you're going to be dying a lot.
Bested by the pig.
But, since this is a Dark Souls-inspired game, I think that is absolutely part of the charm, and we get 3 deaths before our failure actually sends us on a full reset. Between the gorgeous world, intricate combat systems, fascinating storytelling, and throwbacks to classic dungeon crawling, Diviner has an extremely impressive showing here, and I'm super excited to see how this game develops, even if it is a tad rough around the edges. But anyway, I'm just the voice in your head, so what do you think about Diviner? Do you feel like the visuals are relying too much on nostalgia, or is this a good mix of new and old? What are your thoughts on the story? Is it too vague? Are you excited to uncover the mystery behind the ruins? Let's talk about it in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, leaving a like really helps me out a ton, and subscribing is of course the best way to support the channel and keep new videos coming your way, because I put out new reviews every single week. Thanks so much for listening to me today, and you'll be hearing from me again real soon. Get his ass.
Would you? Oh yeah.